the biggest mistake that I see people making, particularly around employee experience, sensors, etc., is they're getting together collectively as a real estate team, maybe with some HR involvement, and they're going through the motions of picking products and implementing solutions. They're not going to the end user to say, hey, what do you think of this, right? And I've seen massive failures where companies have gone down that route, implemented products, and as soon as it hits the floor of being the end, the actual occupant of the space, the employee of the company experiences, they say, no, this is just not right. And I think it's a big mistake. It's been the problem with real estate all along.
Welcome back to Connected Conversations. I'm Bob Massachetti, and I'm going to start this one by saying this person needs very little introduction because everybody knows Simon. I'm very excited to have Simon Davis with me today from Purposeful Intent to talk about the future of real estate technology. Simon, how are you, buddy?
Doing good, mate. Good to see you. Good to see we're both bringing our A-game hair as always. So it's always
right.
one of our calling cards.
That's right. We got to keep it tight. I actually got a haircut.
I think it was Robert T who referred to us as the best hair in the industry. So
I'll take it. Let's get it. Let's get it. So Simon, again, we're in season 2 of Connected Conversations. We're going back to the future, looking at all things future. I know you share the same views as I do in terms of hearing the same kind of buzzwords regurgitated, some of the things that we see in the industry kind of over and over again. And I think that's why, you branched off and started your Purposeful Intent conference network, which I've taken a part in, and I think is a great thing for the industry. But first, before we get into all that, can you take us back and give us your statement of qualification? I've known you for quite some time now. We swapped roles at one point in our careers. So can you take us back and just explain to everybody that knows Simon, give them a little more so that they really know Simon. How did you take me through it? How did you end up here today?
Yeah, I mean, I got to admit, I didn't. So I was born and raised in Ireland, and I didn't grow up in Ireland dreaming of being a real estate technologist. I think like a lot of us, it was kind of a career that I fell into, but has become a passion. And actually, almost 25 years now working in the industry. I think the core piece of my background, when I was growing up, I was a massive fan of LA law. And, as a kid at that point in the UK, watching LA law, like that was my thing, and actually did legitimately get me into wanting to be a lawyer. I went through some of those motions in the UK. I did a law degree, and then actually decided partway through that, frankly, that my fellow colleagues were just not the type of people I felt I could be around every day for the rest of my life. Just very different personalities, very intense, and just wanting different things out of life. The big thing I took away from that, from a career perspective, is in my very last year, I did a course on intellectual property law, and this was way back when. I remember one of the first classes we did was somebody whose initials were MTV. MTV had the URL mtv.com, and they were being sued by MTV for the URL. Literally the second year I was at university was the first time that I actually had access to a computer and had my own, email address, right? So it was very much in the infancy. But I really enjoyed the intellectual property side of the law, and it really got me into technology from that perspective. Decided that, unlike a lot of my friends who were bumming around Europe, I would go and do further education, and I did a master's degree in business with IT, which was sort of really the launch pad for me to get involved. Came out of college, got a job at a retail bank as a programmer. I was possibly the worst programmer that you would ever meet, frankly, because I have, as many of my bosses will probably tell you, I'm not big on attention to detail, which is probably the biggest prerequisite. But I found that one of the things that I was very good at was being that sort of communication link between the techie developers and the business. So being able to sort of explain to people, in whichever parlance they were coming from, how something should work, why we were doing something, why the business needed something, how technically it should be built. And so sort of my real sort of formative career started off as a business analyst, sort of transcribing those types of requirements. In 2000, it would have been 2001, 2002, came across with my company, Big Center, which was later acquired by Accruent. And actually, so Big was a client of mine in the very early days of IWMS. And, worked with them for about 4 or 5 years. Ties into every aspect of my life. Trip to Arizona, I met my now wife. We just celebrated 18 years of marriage. That's why I live in Arizona. I worked for Big Center for 8 years. And really, I think that's probably the piece that most people don't know about me. But then just through the course of, I think my inquisitive nature, with the exception of Big, I've never really stayed at places too long. So I've sort of seen every aspect of it, every aspect of the business. The grounding at Big was fantastic for me, because, they were a technology company at heart, but they also had, a facilities management call center. They had lease administration teams. They had space planners on site. So you would learn on a daily basis what was good, what was bad with the product, and you'd understand the business as well. And I think that was one of the more unique aspects, like getting the foundation in real estate whilst also being a technologist. Ran every aspect of Big's business. Then kind of just got burnt out, went into startup mode, eyes gleaming, thinking I was going to make billions of dollars. And the first one I went to was an absolute disaster. That I think I lasted for about 1.5 years. Then got into the consulting world, various different startups at different levels, including, as you alluded to earlier, Ceraview, more recently Salt Mine as the first employee. So sort of seeing things grow from that. And kind of, I think the reason that I've ended up where I have, a Purposeful Intent, is a few different things, right? For me, the pandemic outlined something very significant to me, which is, as many of you do know, I have a 5 now. She tells everyone she's 5.5. She's not 5, she's 5.5. But I have a 5.5-year-old, and spending all that time with her during the pandemic was I think the best medicine that you could have in terms of getting through it, but also made me realize how much I wanted to be a big part of her life, which is something I didn't necessarily have. My dad was traveling all over the world, so didn't really sort of have that close of a relationship growing up, and I wanted to change that. And then I think also, my view on a lot of things, and Purposeful Intent, sort of the event side being the most visible, is I think I'm in a position now where I have a network and I have a platform and I have connections that we can do things differently, right? So I'm kind of looking at things like conferences, and I'm looking at where I think they're broken and where they could be enhanced upon, which is why PI has come out the way it has. I think a couple of the other things that I feel that have been, not necessarily broken, but just not given the attention they need in the industry. One of them is definitely education. We're doing some really exciting stuff on the education front that we're going to announce in a couple of weeks with some tremendous players in the industry. And then the other one that we talked about a bit before we got started was my long-standing hatred for pay-to-play in any aspect of the industry, particularly when it comes to things like advisory reports, right? So somebody who is not a day-to-day technologist, they have to make a decision on a product. They spend $3,000 to $5,000 buying a report that tells them that they should look at these products. They don't understand the intricacies of how these reports come about. And they don't understand, I think, the nature of investment sometimes required in order to be at the top standing. It used to be a bit of a joke because there were major players in some of these reports that weren't even in the reports back in the day. And it was an eye opener for me, actually working on these things way back at Big, and sort of spending all my time, trying to improve our position in the market. And then frankly, being told one day, if your parent company spends more on marketing and research with us, then your position would improve. And given my nature and my being, that's just not the way I work. So I'm really happy that I feel I'm in a position where I can actually impact things to a great extent and actually change the way that some of the pieces of our business have been done over the years.
That's awesome. And what I always love those conversations because we have a lot of similarities in our background. I have a criminal justice degree. I wanted to be a cop or an FBI agent. I don't know what I wanted. I watched too many action movies in the 80s thinking I was Bruce Willis in Die Hard or something like that. So I have a criminal justice degree and I never really did. I did a little bit when I first got out of college and then 9/11 happened and I ended up in the facilities world. But much like you, I worked for a consulting firm for 10 years where we also sold the services like you mentioned. I had space planners on site. I was a space planner at one point on site at Pfizer through that company. So I got to see the way the technology worked, didn't work. I implemented it. I implemented a solution once upon a time when I was a space planner at a proper end user. And I really got to see what works, what doesn't work. And that has still proved to be one of my strengths as I continue in
Yeah.
the technology space and listening to customers and things like that. So that really resonated with me. And also when you said your life changed when you went to the pandemic and little Cora, right? You spent time with her, and I had things that I had to do in my own personal life with my father, being a senior citizen in the pandemic and where he was at the time. And that came out a lot in our first season of the podcast, where it drifted more towards the human aspect and the shared traumatic event we all went through. And you made a big change. I made a big change. And that leads us here today. And just like what you're trying to do with Purposeful Intent, our podcast and what we're trying to do with Connected Conversations, with Fred, our producer, so diligently helping us along the way with the stuff in the background, is to engage with the Simons of the world, engage with the Robert Teeds of the world, and really understand what's real, what's noise, and where are we really going as an industry, because we all know one another. We cross paths at conferences, we swap jobs. Someday we may work together, who knows? But I like the opportunity to take my platform, your platform, and share a conversation with two people who've been there, done that, is not going to give you a bunch of buzzwords, and maybe people can learn something out of this. So with that said, let's jump into the foundation of the episode. So season 2, we're going back to the future. I picked subject matter experts in certain lanes to talk about specifically what they do and what they see the future of what they do. From my perspective, you're a real estate technologist. Whenever I have a question, have you heard of this solution? Do you know these guys? I always text you. You're the person I go to first. So as we look to the future, we just talked about, again, and this is part of what's driving this conversation. You had a great post on LinkedIn, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where you were talking about research reports. Number one, they're behind a paywall. Number two, the people who engage in those research reports, it's pay to play. So I'd rather hear it from you. So Simon Davis, as we put this out to the world, you could start wherever you want to start, and I'll help kind of shape us as we go along. Yeah. What does the future of real estate technology look like? What's real? What's not real? Give us your hot take. You're always good for a hot take. Give us your cold take, but take us on the journey. Sure. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think that question about what's real is a really big one, right? I wish I could remember who first coined the phrase, but there's I think a very pertinent phrase that people use around the industry, saying, there are a lot of solutions out there to problems that don't exist. So you have people that are trying to sell you on a value proposition for something that might actually really be a true issue. But I think what is sort of clouding the waters to some degree has been and still maintains to be the just sheer level of investment in the industry. And when I look at things from the education perspective, one of the first things that I do is I sit down with people and say, look, if somebody comes up to you and says they're an expert in proptech, they're not. Nobody can be. If you think of the foundational aspects of proptech, it's everything related to building, right, including building of buildings, but also when you look at things like multifamily, industrial, retail, corporate, commercial, right? And to me, our world, and specifically where I'm playing a lot, is very much in a subset of, let's say proptech, commercial real estate tech, and it's the other little CRE tech, the corporate real estate tech, right? So that's the first thing I would say is to my mind, you cannot be an expert in all of those things because they're very, very different disciplines. And even within, the bounds of sort of the technology that we work with, typically what we're doing within the corporate world is we're providing solutions to help manage a portfolio, right? We're not sort of creating a bigger ecosystem than that. And I think that's one thing that people really have to think about. And also when you see sort of the big headlines, I mean, the corporate real estate tech reports on innovation and investment, I think $34 billion invested last year. We're tracking to be higher this year. Incredible number, but if you break that number down, about 8% of that is in commercial. And so what the subset of that is in corporate is even smaller. Not to sort of disregard it, but I think, there are a lot of big headlines out there, as there are in the world, pointing you in one direction that's not necessarily true. I do see there continuing to be significant investment. I mean, I think yesterday alone, both Butler and XY Sense announced raises, which is great to see. And it's, it's great to see, I think, just sort of some of the changes that we're seeing in the market. You know, we look at sort of in the last couple of years, a few things that I see from a trend perspective that are going to change how we operate. You know, when I talk, and I have talked before about sort of the whole concept of what I would call CRE times CRE, and that's commercial and corporate. And I realized, it took me a while, but I realized late last year that, you know, frankly, if you're in corporate real estate or commercial, and let's just say the difference is commercial is anything on the investment side, whether it be landlords, REITs, brokers, etc. Corporate is anything on the management side. A lot of those products are actually very similar in terms of function. I would say I have literally seen products that are geared towards tenant experience in the commercial world, that if you change the title to workplace from tenant, you have a whole new market around the workplace experience side of corporates. And I think that's one of the trends that we're going to see more and more of, is companies that have traditionally sat in one of those silos. You know, I look at companies like Navigator CRE. I look at any of the sensor manufacturers like Identity or VergeSense. I look especially at companies like VTS and HQO, right, that are really moving into the corporate world from the commercial world. Yep. And I think from our perspective, it brings some interesting things. One, you know, certainly it changes, I think, the innovation projections, it changes the investment side, it changes the applicable tools. For the end user, the difficulty then is now all of a sudden you have a ton more applications that become, you know, part of things that you should start looking at. And I think even further dilutes the ability of some of the traditional reports to give you a real picture of where you should be going. You know, if I look over the last 2 years, and this is reading from a list that I presented at an event last week, but, you know, VTS, not only coming into the space, but they acquired 2 of the large applications around tenant experience, Lane and Rise. HQO, you know, recently announced the partnership with JLL and sort of acquisition or takeover of Jet. But I think more importantly, the acquisition of Leaseman, which was really the workplace experience index, right? So how is a technology platform going to take that forwards? You look at, you know, plan on acquiring Aquanize, so moving very much into the IoT space. You look at the whole Space IQ, Archivist, CeraView, iOffice, right? What is that going to be? And then at the other level, you look at the sort of MRI acquisition of Manhattan, and what is that going to make that? So I think we're in a really fascinating time. And I think, you know, we talk about systems, and, you know, your kind words, Bob, that you would go to me on solutions. On a day by day, it's changing, right? I got a message today about a brand new solution that I'm going to take a look at. But the work that I did with Impact and with Henry before I left, and that he's taking on, which I'm very happy to see, you know, we're up to, if you think, when I started in the industry and when IWS was a thing, you were probably looking at 5 service lines. You were probably looking at 10 to 15 products, right? In reality, yep. We're there. Now, just based on the work that Impact have done, you're looking at probably 19 different streams of service line across 250 plus product. So if I'm sat there as a you know, real estate workplace, or even, you know, and more these days, a HR executive being asked, why aren't our people coming back into the office? How do I get them into the office, etc. And then I also need to understand the technology landscape. It's a difficult position to be in, and that's why I do wage war on sort of those pay to play reports, because a lot of people, that is their first frame of reference, right? They go to one of these reports because they've heard the name of the company that's supporting it, and they read it, they digest it, and they're immediately sent, in my mind, down a wrong path, because they're not really looking at, you know, they're looking at a solution as opposed to trying to understand, you know, the use cases around their problem. So I know that was a lot of different topics, but I really think the key one to take away from that is a really changing, still growing right now. I think it's going to shrink, but a changing ecosystem, a lot more players coming in, still a lot of money coming in. You know, we invest very little back in innovation, you know, and, you know, frankly, if you look at legacy products versus some of the new products, they aren't as good as as you know, the applications we use on a daily basis. And I think that's going to change, but I think that's why the money is going to keep coming in, because there is still several unicorns in this space that people just haven't even touched the surface of.
Yeah. And, you know, that was one of the things I was going to ask you, and you touched on it, was proptech. What does that even mean? And you just said it so well, because at the end of the day, the Ring doorbell cameras, that can be considered proptech.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, it's technology that leans into the residential marketplace. So it's this big term that could mean a lot of things. And I think you said it very well, because both you and I pretty much swim in that commercial, that corporate real estate lane. And then getting down to that, it's like, what's real and what's not really real, because there's so much money flowing into the space. And I do hope that there are some unicorns out there, but there are some pretty redundant solutions, in my opinion. There's a lot of the same. And some of that same is based on, and I don't want to call anybody out, older technology. When I ask the question, well, what are you foundationally, how are you collecting this data? And they tell me a certain way. And I'm like, well, you're way behind. And it's like, you're a dime a dozen. So I guess from that perspective, what do you see? What's the best way is maybe coming to a purposeful intent meeting, not to, and this is what I like about it, because you got real end users there. There's no booths there, right? I think the exhibit halls, that's my hot take, they're dead. You go to those, people are avoiding them like the plague. So how do you wade through this stuff, and how do you get to the good stuff, to where is it the PI type end user events? Is it talking to your peers? How do you get to it?
I think it's a combination, but it's certainly the talking piece is the important part, right? I think it's being able to speak to people in the industry about what they've done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. The conception behind PI was very much that there are a lot of end users out there trying to work out what's next, that I would say more apparent than any time in the industry. They want to talk and be around each other, but they're going to events where they're being talked at by, in some instances, paid sponsors. Not always a bad thing. There's a space for all of these things. But I think a lot of them want to just sit down and talk about, how are you dealing with this? What problems are you trying to solve? What are you addressing? What is working? I think that's the big thing as well, right? Because I think a lot of people are sitting there thinking, okay, we have mandates coming down from the CEO to do X, Y, and Z. We're trying to do things to bring people back if we think is right or not. What are other people doing? What is actually working? And I think that's where the connected conversation part, needs to come in. So yeah, absolutely leveraging peers in the industry, leveraging, thought leaders in the industry, of whom there are a lot. And I think, platforms like both yours and mine, I think what we can do is we can also raise up new voices. Like I'm seeing like a lot of younger, diverse talent out there that wouldn't get they wouldn't get the time on air without people being able to help lift that up. And that's one of the other things that we're going to do with PI is we're bringing in speakers. I have a speaker coming to LA. His name is Mills Banji, and I met Mills in London. He was presenting at a HR conference. Interestingly, he was presenting at a Future of Work conference where the only people in the room except one were HR people, which is another, I think, maelstrom coming, because, a lot of our world is around corporate real estate. HR is having more of an impact than ever because of the people side of this, which I think is right. But, Mills is going to come over to LA, and one of the things we're going to talk about is a report that he just released about, how do you attract Gen Z Black talent, right? Things that people aren't necessarily thinking about. I saw him speak. He was talking about platforms and websites and rating systems and things I had never ever come across, because I wouldn't. I'm a 40-something white guy, and it's not sort of in my mainstream. It needs to be if I'm also somebody who's recruiting and trying to scale and bring diversity of thought and being into the industry. So I'm super excited for him to come and talk about that. And I think the platforms that we have can help with that, as well as help with the whole communication side. I think as well, one thing that we're releasing probably next month in partnership with Impact is we have created another iteration of the utilization workplace guide that we're going to get out. There is going to be a slight cost to it, but just to really cover the costs of the work in doing this, because we have done it independently. It's not sponsored by anybody. So, all of our opinions are sort of, true and correct. They're not influenced by any other area. And I think we need to sort of kind of how last year we started shedding light on James Dearsley from Unisu, I think, coined the phrase manels, right? Panels that were just guys. We shed light on that. We're changing that, and we have the ability to change it within our own foundations. I have very publicly stated, and still will, that I will, first thing, if I'm asked to be on a panel, I'll ask who else is on it. If it's all people like me, then I'll suggest other people that could be on the panel. And I'm starting to help curate panels now as well, where we are bringing sort of different thoughts in. So I think, being able to help grow the industry from a knowledge perspective is something we can all give back, and have the platform to do that.
So I want to touch on a couple things you said there, and it kind of hit home for me. It didn't kind of, it hit home for me. When I started my career, I was in the corporate real estate technology space. Let's go to that point. And I'm working for a consulting firm, and I had come from the functional side. I had come from sitting on a client side. I saw a lot of things. They never let me even go to a conference. I was not allowed to go to conferences. It was a great honor. And if maybe you had a great sales year, you could go to the conference as a reward. And I had no voice. I had one of my largest projects was for a defense contractor, most successful, great deployment, led to more business. They were speaking at an industry event, and I had to beg to even go. And I led the project. I led the project because the old heads were like, no, this is what we go to. And quite frankly, they were, even at that point, some of them were very stale. And it was like, you haven't seen what's going on out in the world. And I would love to share my voice. Again, that comes back to the podcast, that comes back to purposeful intent, and giving the different generations a platform. Now we can do it with tech. Back then, we didn't have this. We didn't have all this that we have today. And then I want to come back to, the point you were making about diversity and inclusion. That came out a lot in season 1. My brother, as a matter of fact, runs diversity and inclusion. He did at IBM for a while. He's a big voice of diversity and inclusion, and was on some boards there, and now works for a company called Beauty for All, where he's part of what he's charged with is diversity and inclusion for that company. And, that's really important for, what you're doing on panels. And I've seen all the posts, and I agree with them 100%. We do that here at Connected Conversations, where we want strong voices, whether you're male, female, it doesn't matter. And we even kicked off. That's why I went to Kimberly Castle, our friend, to start the podcast in general. I was like, I know a great, strong female voice who can give us a great take on the industry. But I think what you're getting at is the future is the human-centric connectivity of one another to decide what technology solutions are going to be real, having diverse voices, asking a little bit of everybody from every background, every industry, every vertical within the corporate real estate or commercial industry to say what works and what doesn't work, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I get some of those most interesting facts on products, right? Everybody can do, if you can't do a great pitch and a great presentation and have a great slide deck, you shouldn't be even in the business. Right. But for me, where you get the best information is actually certainly from speaking to people that have experienced the companies, experienced the highs and lows. We all know that every tech product is going to have some sort of teething issues or problems with deployment or problems. And for me, it's making the choice of the company that you feel is going to be best addressed or best equipped and willing to address those problems and to kind of grow and build with you. Whenever I sort of consult on that side of the business, I always say to people, if you when I was at Big, if you asked me for references, I could probably name the 3 companies I would give you because they were my 3 best clients, and a couple of them were my best friends. And they would always give a great reference, whether they felt it or not. And I felt that the products were compelling, and certainly the price points were out. But don't expect, if you ask for a reference, it's like you personal, right? If you're applying for a job, you're not going to give a reference of somebody who's going to say bad things about you. Yeah. So I always say to people, look, when you go for references, ask for clients that have left, because a lot of clients will have left for very valid reasons. Maybe it's a change of direction, it's a change in sort of, what they're trying to do, but they will have a great feedback about the product and about how well it actually delivered. And I find I get much richer information doing that than you could any other possible way, because you're actually getting a true account of what's happened. So, certainly I think using those things and using a peer network, right? Purposeful Intent, one of the things that we did on the back of it is we built a Slack channel that's end user only, and the end users will go in there and they'll post questions about things they're working on. I
love it.
Any aspect, right? And just saying, hey, I'm looking at workplace experience. What would you recommend? We're coming across products that we hadn't heard of. and solutions we haven't heard of. And you mentioned Kim. The resources like the CBREs and JLLs, Cushmans, and Newmarks of the world, they have some of that insight. Some of it you have to take with a bit of a pinch of salt because they also have a lot of investment in these products these days. But again, I think for an end user, you have a wealth of people out there who want to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
You've just got to be able to wade through the sales jargon and get to sort of the real understanding of what you're trying to achieve. I'll say something that has really surprised me in the last sort of 6 months is talking to people about some of those technologies around workplace experience, and coming across more and more companies where they built their own product because a lot of the products that are out there getting kudos in the market didn't meet security requirements of large corporations, right? And I think there are those other types of considerations that you can shortcut very, very quickly by addressing, the right people, the Kims, the Henry Masseys of the world, that can actually give you that quick and easy tie-in. I would also go as far to say is that there are definitely organizations out there that are making a lot of money by advising, consulting, and implementing products that aren't necessarily the best product for what you're trying to do. It's their business. It always has been. There always have been those out there. But again, the average consumer isn't going to see that, right? They're just going to see the name tied to a big company and think, well, they used to say, right, nobody gets fired for picking a Deloitte or picking an IBM.
Yeah.
And that's not that I'm directing at those particular companies, but it's often easy to make that leap to somebody that you perceive to be a leader, but you have to, I think, go into it all eyes open.
I think, I always look for the nuggets and the things that I'm going to take away from these podcasts, and that I hope the audience does as well. It's really looking at proptech as a whole and understanding what lane you as a company or you as a buyer needs to be in to arrive at the right solution. The next thing I'm hearing is that the community is going to shape the future of real estate technology. I don't think the firms developing, I work for a technology company, we're not going to necessarily shape the future unless our end users arrive at that conclusion that we are future proof and we have a roadmap and we have the technology that's going to serve them today and the future. And I'm really impressed with what I just said there, but I'm going to credit that to you because that's what I just took away from. It's not going to be the technology companies that shape the future. It's going to be our community. Yes?
Dude, the biggest mistake that I see people making, particularly around employee experience, sensors, etc., is they're getting together collectively as a real estate team, maybe with some HR involvement, and they're going through the motions of picking products and implementing solutions. They're not going to the end user to say, hey, what do you think of this, right? I work for company X. I'm going to be the person that's using this product on a daily basis. And in many instances, I'm going to be using it to make a decision on do I come into the office or not. I should be informed. And I've seen massive failures where companies have gone down that route, implemented products, and as soon as it hits the floor of being the end, the actual occupant of the space, the employee of the company experiences, they say, no, this is just not right. And I think it's a big mistake. It's been the problem with real estate all along. If you read Chris Kane's book, Where's My Office, right? It's always been a transactional business that's driven by finance with very little attention paid to the people actually in the box. And I think now more than ever, we have to pay that attention because, to your point, it's the occupiers of space, the actual employees are going to drive what's next. Not only, I think, in terms of, acceptable solutions to existing problems, but also the future. If employees decide en masse at a company they're not going to come into the office, really changes what our technology solutions can, should, and will help provide, right? And I think those types of things going forwards are going to be a bigger input. If companies are more focused on working models that are, I like to still call it sort of work from anywhere. I think a lot of the terms are getting, people are putting their own phraseology behind things like hybrid and remote, but I think people want the ability to work when, where, and how they want, and I think that will continue. Whether you're a company that says, okay, you can do this 5 days a week, you can do this 1 day a week, you can do it, for 30 minutes every Wednesday when it's raining, that's their decision point to determine, on that. But I think the employee power base about what they need to do their jobs is going to drive a lot of what we're doing. And I think it's going to drive one big change in our industry that would make me very, very hesitant in certain areas if I was looking at purchasing systems, which is, I think we're going to get the big players, and I'm talking, the likes of Salesforce, ServiceNow, Google, Microsoft coming into our domain. They never really looked at workplaces as a 10x of investment to bring their money back. But if you look at those companies, and particularly I'll pick on, in a good way, Salesforce, right? What is Slack? Slack is a tool to enable hybrid communication, enable asynchronous work. It's the biggest product, or it's sort of the biggest growth product that they will have. And as you've seen, as publicly announced, they're leasing out a large proportion of their space. I won't quote the numbers because I can't remember them accurately, but they're doing that because they see the power of their tool in delivering this new way of working. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you might be a company, and if you think about it, right, with the exception of ServiceNow, are probably the company that have been in our field the longest, and still not really that long. Let's say they're a company of 5,000 to 10,000 developers. Take them out of the equation. Most companies in our space, most of the 230 companies on that list that Impact have put together, probably have between 10 and 150 developers, maybe 200 at tops. They're all of a sudden going to be competing with Salesforce and Slack and Google. And I think that could be a major change to how this industry operates, because you're going to have bigger players coming in. Similar like the ServiceNow model was always a good one, because they would have an install base on the IT help desk. So how big a stretch is it to then look at additional component pieces, right? And you see the same thing across the board. Company has Slack, company has Salesforce. You say, you know what? We actually, through all of our technology, Teams, etc., we can actually say, this is how often Simon and Bob email each other. This is how often they chat on Teams. This is the projects they're working on. We can see the threads of discussion and the number of question marks, and we can say, you know what, this is when you should come into the office. So if you're looking for a hybrid or a work from anywhere enablement tool to help you with the biggest problem, which I think is going to be, right sizing your real estate so that everybody is happy. And that really comes down to, I do think, a degree of scheduling when people are in the office, when they need to be in the space. That's your solutions right there, right? And that to me, if I was coming out, if I was on that sort of trend of a newer company in an already condensed space, and all of a sudden I'm also going to be competing against Googles of the world and the Salesforces of the world, I'd be hesitant, definitely.
It's funny, again, Nuvolo being an independent scoped application on the ServiceNow platform. We understand that, and that's why that's the platform we chose to develop on. But at the end of the day, we're purpose-built. And what I have a bit of a hot take, having been in this world for a little bit. When you deal with those companies that are now just embarking on these journeys, they don't sometimes know our space. They may see it from a reservation perspective or an engagement perspective, but then they start to try and spin, we could do all these other things. They can't tell you what a triple net lease is. I can. Right. They can't tell you that. They can't tell you what a BOMA standard is. I can. So they may have 5,000 developers, but do they have the experience, the customers, and the acumen to sit down with a space planner, a capital planner, a real estate manager, and have these real conversations and understand what they're doing? I haven't seen that. But to your point, yes, again, having a platform, our platform being ServiceNow, absolutely that it's trending in that direction. But there's the Nuvolo out there that does a guy like me and partners that we know to partner with. Impact Group that you mentioned, or a CBRE or some of those folks, or even a Deloitte, because we recognize we need those people who compare the functional with the tech.
No, absolutely.
A lot of that's missing from the big boys.
No, agreed, absolutely. But I think if when the investment becomes a point, or when the potential return becomes significant enough, that's when they can bring that on. So I think the way that I phrase it to people is, I think this year, next, they're going to dip their toe in the water, and we'll see what comes out of that. I think the other interesting trend as well is, I think we're going to see, I talk to sort of, let's say more traditional companies, and you talk about, who are your competitors, et cetera. And they will typically, they'll sort of run off the same names. And I think a lot of companies in our space, they're not looking at looking over their shoulder at, I think, the newer companies that are coming in that are making a lot of headway. You know, I look at like, and I have there's no insider baseball here, but, you know, I look at a company like Density. You know, last year they announced 150 million raise, I think it was, and the same day they also announced the acquisition of a product that essentially was, you know, let's call it a sort of a digital twin enablement tool. It was a fairly small part of the announcement, but I immediately jumped on that, and I see a company like that as having the potential, the funding to actually become more of a holistic competitor. You know, I firmly believed for a long time that I don't believe a company is going to rule the market by just being able to provide sensors. And, you know, a year and a half ago, most of these companies were one-trick pony in terms of the sensor solutions they provided. So you didn't even really have a holistic offering. I do think that these companies, when they build out, in addition to, you know, sensors to help track and understand the use of space and the design of space, they build tools to help design better space. And they build, you know, those sort of functions in there in more of a, you know, digital twin sort of metaverse type development way that they're going to have.
I agree. I was going to ask you to touch on that. Digital twin right now, it's not there. I don't care what anybody says. Microsoft's probably the closest, but when I see digital twin on somebody's website and it's like, all right, I don't know how much stock I put in that. That's my hot take. I think digital twins are coming. I think they're years out, but to you, it needs to what you said, it needs to be a holistic solution. We have the sensors, you know, we have the inputs, we have the APIs, and then we have the platform to render the digital twin. It can't just be, we're a digital twin solution. It needs to be the sum of the parts, if I'm hearing.
Absolutely. No, then that's absolutely it. It needs to be the sum of that part. And that's the only way in my mind, you're going to get a holistic implementation of some of these products, is they have to be more like, just a bit of a preview, this utilization report we're coming out with. The two things that struck me most, one was of 25 or so companies that we commissioned to look into, there are only 2 that even have considered building analytics from from alternative products into their solutions. By which I mean there are only 2 companies that are actually building, let's call it, sensor agnostic data platforms that can ingest data from a multitude of sources, which I think is crazy, because I think there are still going to be needs for people to use different sensors for different environments. So why not build an analytics platform that does have that ingestion capability? The other thing that really surprised me is, again, I think off the top of my head, out of the 25 or so products, there are only 3 that dealt with any issues where in addition to tracking sort of utilization, occupancy, and the traditional aspects, they're also looking at IAQ. And I think there were VergeSense, there was Symbian, and R0. And to me, again, like a dumb sensor that just does one thing. For some companies that are installing those products right now, by the time they're installed, they're going to be redundant. Yeah. Right. And I think when we look at sort of the future, it is looking at that. It's looking at that roadmap. It's looking at what are these companies going to be. You know, I looked at when R0 acquired Coworker, I found it intriguing at the time, because I thought, why is it essentially a very high end hospital grade cleaning company buying a sensor manufacturer? Now it's fairly apparent, because they're also building and developing devices that are more driven from the sensor information, right, and can actually clean on a use basis. That to me is a valuable use case. Somebody going out and buying a sensor solution to understand how many people are coming back into the office, it's money just sort of being thrown away.
I agree with you on that one. My favorite phrase is "show me the heat map." Every meeting we go into, what are you going to do with your heat map? What are you going to do with the heat map? Tell me.
It's true. And I think it goes to another future need, which is the talent that companies are going to want to have, which I think is a lot more around, data science and understanding that. You could have the USS Enterprise of a dashboard out there with all the lights going off, but what do they mean? If Simon sat at his desk 8 hours a day, does that mean he's doing anything, or is he just, binge watching? I used to say Squid Games, but I don't even know what I binge watch these days. And I think there's that connectivity, and it's work that Corinne Murray, who joined me in starting PI, does incredible things around, which is looking at, how the workplace and ways of working actually make you more effective as an organization, right? It's that driver. It's not just efficiency, right? It's not just the old barometers, is actually effectiveness of what you're doing. So there's some interesting places to go. I think we're still very much in a wait and see period, right? I think right now we're at that point where virtually everyone I speak to is saying we'll get through the summer, and then we'll expect to start seeing whatever's next, in the fall.
So you've given us a lot of great tidbits, and throughout the course of this podcast, and I think we arrived at that the community of end users is going to drive the future, not necessarily the technology companies, because at the end of the day, the end users and their experiences are going to drive that. I think it's going to move more towards, purposeful intent type events, collaborative roundtables, discussions, less about vendor centric exhibit halls and things like that, and conferences that give you a sales pitch as opposed to a direction to go. I think we both agree that digital twins are coming. They're just not there yet, and that digital twin solutions need to be holistic. I think we touched on hardware solutions need to be more than a one-trick pony. I definitely agree with that. Again, not to call anybody out, but if you're based off an older technology that we know doesn't give you the best kind of output, you're going to die. And it's not only that, you have to do other things and not just one thing. So I think we got a lot of great things out of this podcast. I'm going to leave you one last question for you, Simon. Yeah. Give me a hot take, whatever you want. I'm going to give you, your hot takes are the best in the business. What do you, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do mean to put you on the spot. Give me a hot take to wrap up the podcast.
I think one of the things that we need to start looking at more and more is a wider audience of product when it comes to work, right? And take the place out of work. Work is the important thing. It's what happens. It's the reason we all exist. The reason corporate real estate sort of developed and is where it is because we decided that the best place to do that was in a box somewhat arbitrarily. I am seeing tremendous content coming out of events that are tangential to the corporate real estate world, which is a lot of these HR based events, where people are talking about things like culture not being just bricks and mortar without having necessarily a vested interest, right? We think about it, our base and the people that we sell to, they all have an interest in physical real estate being a thing. And don't get me wrong, I do believe there's incredible power in the industry. I love, Sarah Anderson is one person at Genentech. She always talks about that, the power of casual collision. And I think it's so big. Like for me, even when I travel, a lot of the best conversation, like meeting Mills, who now is going to become a big part of PI, was just because I decided to go to an event and then, ended up sort of cornering him at the lunch buffet and having a conversation. That would never have happened in a remote world. I think you can see conferences, and I think you can see trade shows, presentations, etc., going a lot more virtual, because why spend $40,000 and fly a team of 4 people out to have a trade show booth where people are going to attend? Make it virtual. Have people come and present whatever content they want. We started doing that at Impact, and it was incredibly
powerful. You participated in that. That was a great event.
Just gives people that open foundation. But I think we're going to see a lot more impact. We're seeing it, I would say, already from a decision making's perspective. You may have a view on this, but whereas pre-pandemic there'd maybe be 2 or 3 people that truly were decision makers in a tech buy, now it's more like 10. Because now, in addition to real estate and potentially IT, you also do have HR that is going to be a big piece of that, and rightly so. Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're enabling people to do work, right? So our involvement in that has got to be, I think, more closely parlayed with HR. And I think a lot of people do have to think a lot more about, why are we bringing people in? What is the benefit of space? How do we make those experiences better? Mm-hmm. And I'm already, people that are talking, well, is 3 days a week better than 4 or 5? It's not the right question to be asking, right? You need to be looking at what is the purpose of people being in the space. There absolutely is real benefit to that. But I don't believe anymore that for knowledge workers, at least, it's not, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Should be more based upon what are you actually trying to achieve. So
what's the output? And you said it great, because a lot of in the early stages of the pandemic, and when we were starting to see our way through it, people were saying it's return to work. And it's like, it's not return to work. The work never stopped. That means you don't understand. It's return to an office. It's a return to a place. It's a return to your cube or your, your four-walled office. The work never stopped. And if you say return to work, you've completely missed what's happened, what's going to happen. And I think that's what you're getting at. And I don't mean to speak for you, but my take on it is everybody needs to just get over it. I'm tired of it. We need to be able to do our work. I'm here in Colorado, you're in Arizona, but yet we're still executing on creating some content. It's the work, it's the output. Get over it. Get over it.
I think you might have coined something new there, Bob, which is RTP, return to place, because there is value to that place, but that place doesn't necessarily need to be your traditional hard-walled offices, right? And it's going to be interesting. I think we've got a lot of things that we're going to learn in the next sort of year and a half about where we're truly going to end up. The one thing I'll say is that I haven't heard anybody come out yet and say, you know what, we opened up the offices and we've had more people come back than we were expecting.
I have not heard that. I've heard we've had significantly less people return to the office. Yeah. And with that, I'm going to leave it there.
Thanks,
with every podcast though, before you go, Simon, I end every podcast with a bit of gratitude. And it's not just for this hour you spent with me. Again, I've known you 5 or 6 years now. Anytime I've said this before, but I'll say it again here on the podcast. Anytime I've ever asked you for help, you've given me that help, and you've never once asked for me anything in return from me. Not that I wouldn't. I'd always be here to help you with whatever you need moving forward with Purposeful Intent. And I wish you the best of luck. We participated in the New York event. I really enjoyed my time there. But what I want to say to you is anybody who doesn't know Simon, if you need help, Simon is the person who can help you, and understand that it will be genuine and he will not expect anything in return. And that's the way I view you, Simon.
I truly appreciate it, Bob. Thank you. Means a lot.
You're very welcome. So with that, another great episode of Connected Conversations. Everybody, maybe we'll call this one Freddie. Freddie, we'll call this one Everybody Knows Simon. So with that, we talked about the all things future of property tech and where we're going within our community that me and Simon have invested our whole careers in. And I think this was a great conversation. I thank Simon once again for helping me out when I asked him for help. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the interwebs.